Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov, Boker Tov. Welcome to our Parsha class, Parsha of Kedoshim. We had a little break over the last few weeks, Pesach break. Hope you all had a wonderful Pesach. Enjoyed the matzah, wine, all the scrumptious food that we have over Pesach, and we are ready to continue the Parsha class after Pesach, Parsha of Kedoshim. So we are right in the middle of the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra. The Kundei Chumash, we're on page 758, 759, chapter 19 of Leviticus. The Parsha of Kedoshim is a Parsha that is filled with mitzvahs, right? Many Parshas talks a little bit about the story of the Jewish people, and sometimes a particular mitzvah may span over 20, 30 verses, like we had recently with the story of, let's say, the leper, like the Mitzorah, right? It was two parshas long, a parsha and a half long, dealing with all the various aspects of this mitzvah. Certain mitzvahs are long and detailed, but the parsha of Kedoshim gives us many, many mitzvahs, very shorthanded. One verse, a half a verse. Sometimes one verse contain 2 or 3 or 4 mitzvahs in one verse. A lot of verses, a lot of mitzvahs in this parsha. In fact, the opening of the parsha, Rashi right away comments and tells us that this parsha was said during the year of Hakhel. Last year was the year of Hakhel on the Jewish calendar. It was a year when all the Jewish people made this pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And in other words, Moshe found it necessary to tell over this parsha that has so many mitzvahs when so many of the Jewish people were present. So if you read it, you'll see many, many different mitzvahs. Just to name a few, a lot of it had to do with the sanctifying ourselves, even in things that are perhaps permissible, but just kind of holding ourselves back, not to indulge in self gratification just for the sake of enjoyment, keep ourselves holy. The refrainment from unholy marriages, being involved in relationships that are forbidden, staying away from idol worship and the like. And we also talk about giving to the poor, not eating the orla, for example, the first 3 years of a fruit tree, to stay away from eating the fruit for the first 3 years, not to curse a deaf man, someone who is deaf, who can't hear. We should not curse them and make fun of them behind their back, because it is wrong, even if they don't hear about it. And I want to focus over here on one verse. Verse 18. And it's a pretty famous verse. Perhaps one of the most famous verses in all of the Torah. And it's a verse that we actually begin our morning prayers with: the mitzvah of love your fellow man as yourself. And before we read this inside, this idea of Ahavas Yisrael, love for a fellow Jew, is very much connected to the time of year that we find ourselves in now. We now find ourselves in the days of Sphira, right? Sphira HaOmer, right? Every evening we are counting the Omer. And there's a lot of significance to this time of the year, in addition to remembering the actual offering of the Omer that was brought in the temple, the addition to the idea of counting and with the excitement to Shavuos, to the day that we received the Torah, just as the Jewish people counted the days when they left Egypt, counting 7 weeks till they received the Torah. So kind of re-experience that through our counting of the Omer. But there was also a little bit of a sad incident that happened to the Jewish people during this time of the Omer, and that is with the students of Rabbi Akiva. You may be familiar with this from previous years. We try to mention this every year, where the students of Rabbi Akiva, they died in a plague. 24,000 of them all died in a short few weeks during the time of the Omer. Rabbi Akiva was someone who had a fascinating story of his life. Perhaps in a different week we'll delve more into the story, the life story of Rabbi Akiva. But eventually he made it to be one of the greatest, or perhaps the greatest sage from Mishnaic era, a Talmudic sage. And he had 24,000 students, followers, who were studying his teachings. And one of his great teachings, as we'll mention soon, is that the Ahavas Yisrael, love your fellow as yourself, is a cardinal principle in Torah. And unfortunately, within a short few weeks, 24,000 of them died in a plague. And the Talmud says that this wasn't by accident. It wasn't just, everything happens for a reason. The cause for this plague was because they lacked the proper respect and love for each other, because they were lacking in this respect for each other. So this caused them to die. Until today, we mourn the death of these students. Can you imagine that have so many of these students die in such a short time? What it did, what effect that it had to the teaching of the Torah, right? And from the 24,000, after that, only he gained another 5 students, and these 5 students basically continued the chain of the lineage of teaching the Torah. But till today, we don't take haircuts, and we don't get married, we don't listen to live music. A lot of things that we don't do during the time of Sphira, which here in New Orleans is a big deal because we have Jazz Fest, so many things going on. They're always during the time of Sphira, which is a little bit problematic from a Torah perspective, because you're not supposed to listen to live music, specifically during the time of Sphira. So the days of Sphira run from second day of Passover through Shavuos. The question is, which days of the days of Sphira do we have to mourn? The break, according to all opinions, is the day of Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, which this year is going to be Sunday, May something, in about 3 weeks. That is, I think, 3 weeks from today. That is Lag BaOmer. That's the day that's the break. There are various customs of which days of the days of Sphira. The Chabad custom is to do basically the entire Sphira besides the last 3 days before Shavuos. Some have different customs, whether they start from the month of Iyar, which is going to be in a few days, or they start from Passover, but they end at Lag BaOmer. Different opinions exactly when it begins and when it ends. And you can look online, or we can discuss this later to find out specifically the various opinions. According to some opinions, it already began. Some opinions say no, it only begins on Rosh Chodesh, which is going to be later this week. So it did not begin today yet. So there are different ways of how to count these days of the Omer that we mourn. We're more stringent. So we start from Passover all the way till 3 days before Shavuos. Yeah. But that's because we take 2 opinions and we take the stringent side of each opinion. But there is a legitimate 2 or 3 opinions of when days, because seemingly it wasn't the entire days of the Omer that they died. They died in about 33 days. Question is, how do we count those days? Which of the 33 days? So let's read verse 18 inside. Page 766, 767, verse 18. Lo sikoim veloi sitoid es b'nei amecha. You should neither take revenge nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. You should love your fellow as you love yourself. Ani Hashem, I am God. So let's first just briefly talk about the first half of the verse. You should not take revenge and you should not bear a grudge. Rashi gives the famous two examples for this. Take revenge would be one day I asked Lance, I need a hammer. Could I please borrow your hammer? And you say, no, sorry, Mendel, you can't borrow my hammer. Okay. A week later, Lance can't find his hammer. And he heard that Mendel purchased a new hammer. So Lance comes knocking on Mendel's door and says, Mendel, please, would you lend me your hammer? And I say, I'm sorry, Lance, I'm not going to lend you my hammer just as you did not lend me your hammer. That's called taking revenge. That is forbidden. What's bearing a grudge? Bearing a grudge is I go to Lance asking for his hammer. He says no. Lance comes to me asking for my hammer. I say, sure, I'm not going to be like you who didn't lend me a hammer. I'm going to be nice. I am giving you a hammer, right? So here, I'm not taking revenge, but I'm bearing a grudge. I'm reminding you what you have done to me. So that is two things that are both forbidden. Don't take revenge just because someone wasn't nice to you. It doesn't mean you can't be nice to them. And if someone does something wrong to you, try to forget about it. Move on as if it never happened. Don't bear a grudge. That is the first half of the verse. Comes the second half of the verse and says, you should love your fellow as yourself. And we conclude, Ani Hashem, I am God. Rashi mentions somewhere that whenever God says, I am God, in a continuation to a certain mitzvah, it usually means that the fulfillment of this mitzvah is very much dependent on you, and only you know whether you fulfill this mitzvah. Because it's something to do in your heart, or something to do that no one else can know. So have you fulfilled the mitzvah of love your fellow man as yourself? Only you know, because it's a feeling in your heart. So God says, I am God, which means, you know who else knows? God knows. It's between me, you and God. And God says, I am God. I know whether you fulfill this mitzvah or not. But let's talk about the mitzvah for a moment. Love your fellow man as yourself. What does that mean? To love another person as yourself. Is it even possible? And Rashi here quotes the famous Rabbi Akiva, right? We're going to mention a lot of Rabbi Akiva today. Rabbi Akiva says, Ze klal godel b'Torah. This is a big or an important principle in the Torah. This mitzvah of love your fellow man as yourself is not just another mitzvah. There are 613 mitzvahs. This is not just another mitzvah. It is a klal godel. It's a big principle in the Torah. And the question that the commentators try to understand here is, how is this possible? Is it possible? Self-love is an important trait that we have. It's the drive to live, to be successful, to get a job, to have a family. The things that we do, it's all for self, right? That's just the way we are. God created us in a way where we try to live well, to be happy, to have a good life. It's all because we love ourselves. People who have a problem and they don't have the self-love, it's dangerous. Unfortunately, they don't live productive lives. Sometimes they end up, God forbid, hurting themselves, suicide. I mean, right? It's a healthy person has a healthy dose of self-love. And that, how are you going to tell me that the self-love that we have for ourselves is also the way we have it to another person? I should love someone else just like I love myself. I mean, I could love them. I could care for them. I could help them, but just as I love myself. How is that possible? to say the story with Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasso. He was a great Hasidic rabbi, lived a few hundred years ago. And he was famous for helping other people. He would go and, unfortunately, at the time, there were many Jews, sometimes that were sent to prison for not paying their landlords, whatever, for their rent. So he would try to go and pay up their debt and redeem them and release them from prison. He said he told over a story. He said he was once sitting in a town's bar, pub, and he hears two locals who are drinking, and they are pretty drunk, and they're having this conversation. And one of them turns to the other and says, Ivan, tell me, do you love me? And the other one says, of course I love you. Do you love me dearly? Are you a good friend of mine? Of course, I'm the best friend. I love you dearly. He says, well, tell me, what's bothering me? Ivan says, what's bothering you? I don't know what's bothering you. How should I know what's bothering you? He says, how do you call yourself my friend if you don't know what's bothering you? So that's the question. Is it possible? Is it possible to truly love your fellow as yourself? Here's something else interesting. Going back to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva discusses in the Talmud an interesting scenario. The scenario is you're on a hike. You're in the desert. It's hot. It's humid. And you are miles away from civilization. You're miles away from any water source, whether it is a stream, a river, a lake, a faucet, no water. It's you and a friend. And you're hiking together. And you're thirsty, extremely thirsty. You're getting dehydrated. And you feel that if you don't have a good dose of water, you may not make it. And guess what? Your friend feels exactly the same. Now, you do have with you one jug of water. The problem is that there's only enough water for one person to survive. So either you drink the whole thing, it's your water. Either you drink the water and likely your friend will not survive, or give it to your friend, you won't survive, or split it. But if you split it, you're likely both not going to survive. What do you do? Now, this is a case, a theoretical case that the Talmud discusses. I once read an article where the story was a real story not too long ago, where two friends were hiking somewhere here in the States, and this almost the identical scenario actually happened in real life, where the two people were going together. They had one thing of water, and they were debating whether they should split it or not. What will you do? What will you say, Lance? Not what will you do, what will you say? Because what will you do? It's a tough situation. We should never be in that situation. Not to say split it. Split it. And
find a way or something. But once you don't split it, then one person definitely has to split it, at least there's hope.
Lance, you're saying that really the reason that you're giving to split it is not because one takes precedent over the other. It's just that you're hoping, there's like this hope that maybe you'll prolong life for extra hour, 2, 3, however long, and then hopefully you'll find one. So this is a hypothetical. What if you knew certainly for sure that there won't be any water in the next few hours? Meaning, we were saying it's hypothetical because really the question boils down to whose life comes first, your life or your friend's life or neither. That's really the question. And you could say, well, let's just split it. So hopefully we'll find water. That's obviously great, the best case scenario. But a hypothetical will be if you're certain, hypothetically, that there won't be any water. So splitting it definitely means that both of you will die. One person drinking it means one person will live, one person will die. That's the question that really the Talmud is discussing.
So we have just like across the city, the Dead Sea, the sea breeze, or you know, when they wandering in the desert, they didn't know that there would be various found. So we have to have faith.
Okay, that's a great answer. Okay, so Lance is telling us two answers, two explanations. First of all, he's saying faith is a very integral part of this discussion because there is no hypothetical where you say, I am certain that there won't be any water. Where's the faith? How's that even possible? We always say maybe something will happen. Maybe someone will pass by. Maybe something, right? You can't say for sure that there won't be any water. That's A. B, quotes this verse in this Parsha. Love your fellow man as yourself. If you're equals, you should both split it. This is what Lance said. And the truth is, that is one opinion. Of course, there has to be two opinions, right? One opinion, I believe, by the name of Ben Pitora. He is following Lance's view, and he says, in this scenario, you got to split it. No way can one person just drink the whole thing. Just because it's yours, therefore you have a right for it. You have another fellow with you, and by you drinking the entire jug of water, he's certainly going to die. We can't allow that. We have to split it. Comes the second opinion and says, no. The second opinion famously says, your life takes precedence. You come first. And you have the right to drink the jug of water. And then you have faith that your friend will also survive. You know who has the opinion, the second opinion? Rabbi Akiva. From all people, Rabbi Akiva, the one that tells us love your fellow as yourself is a principle, a cardinal principle in the Torah. He is the one that tells us that when it comes to the scenario of the water in the desert, you have a right to your own jug of water. Is that a question? On Rabbi Akiva? Right. Right. So good question. So that is there's a technical answer to that. What does it mean to take someone's life? Refraining from saving someone, is that considered taking someone's life? Right. So this idea of taking someone's life means actively taking someone's life, doing something to that person that will directly take their life in order to save your life. That is forbidden. But not to save them in order to save their life. Meaning, I'm not doing anything to them. I'm just saving my own life, right? That is not considered taking someone's life. So if you are certain that you can't save them and you're going to die, then I don't think you have an obligation to try. I mean, it's a good thing to do, obviously, but you don't have to risk your life. This is from a dry halachic perspective. There's no obligation to risk your life to save someone else. There is an obligation to be uncomfortable, to go out of your way to save someone's life, which we spoke about many times, which it isn't a law in most societies, like in American society. There is no obligation to go out of your way to save someone. But from a Jewish perspective, you do have to go out of your way to save someone. But you don't have to risk your life to save someone. If you, I mean, we encourage it, but there's no obligation. So the question basically is, what does it mean to love your fellow as yourself? Is it possible? Rabbi Akiva seems to say that ultimately you do come first. And that's a discussion for itself, exactly why, where's the faith, why shouldn't you split it? But the idea is, seemingly, we're not completely. And the truth is, that's kind of the reality. Because no matter how much love I may have to someone else, if we compare it to the love we have to ourselves, is it really going to be the same? Right? I have immense love to someone else, but to myself, I have even more love. I have this natural, innate love to myself, self-love. Here's another interesting thing. And this is a story that you may be familiar with the potential converts who came to two great sages, the sage of Shammai and the sage of Hillel and Shammai. So there was this convert, maybe he had ADD, I don't know, but he wanted the short route. He didn't want to spend years, months, weeks studying and becoming a convert. He wanted something quick. He wanted to get it on one foot. So he comes to Shammai and says, Shammai, teach me the entire Torah on one foot. Shammai says, are you sugar? I don't have time for this shenanigans. Get out of it. Didn't have many patience. Okay. So he turns to Hillel, who was famous for his patience. Hillel, teach me the entire Torah on one foot. Hillel says, I got it for you. Madaloch Sani, what you don't like, don't do to others. Right? I mean, the golden rule is a little bit different than that, right? Do to others what you would like done to yourself. This is a little different. Here, he uses the negative, and he starts with yourself. What you don't want to be done to you, don't do unto others. That's what he says. Basically, Abbas Yisrael. That is the rule. That's the Torah on one foot. And Hillel says, the rest is all commentary. The rest is commentary. The great sage, the great Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, he asks an interesting question. He says, why did Hillel use the negative and not the positive? Why did he use language? What you don't want to done to you, don't do to others. Why didn't he say, what you do want done to you, do to others? Why using the negative, not the positive? And the Tzemach Tzedek gives a very interesting explanation, which perhaps gives us a little bit of a better understanding of what the general idea of love your fellow as yourself really is. What does it mean? So, the Tzemach Tzedek says, going back to the self-love, being judgmental, not being judgmental, that's really what it's all about. He says, what happens when you fail? When you do something wrong? When you do something that, I shouldn't have done this. What's the first thing that comes to mind for yourself? He says, generally, the first thing comes to mind is the excuses, the reasons. I know I shouldn't have, but I was tired. I wasn't thinking. I'm still a good person. Right? You don't judge yourself based on this one act. You don't say, I'm a bad person because I did this one little thing. Right away, you put it in perspective. Naturally. maybe even take a moment and think about something that happened. And then right away, you have all the reasons why it happened. I know it was wrong. I shouldn't have, but you have all the buts. And do you say, and therefore I am, do you think less of yourself? Of course not. I'm a good person. Okay, I had this little problem. This is the reason why it happened. That comes from self-love. King Solomon tells us, Al kol p'shoyim t'chasa av, that our self-love covers over all of our sins. Every time we sin, every time we fail, we love ourselves, and therefore we have all the reasons why we did it, and we don't judge ourselves. We don't put ourselves in that box. I am a person that does this. No, I'm a good person that failed. What happens when we see someone else do the exact same thing? The first thing that comes to mind is all the problems. Look at this person. I'm good for nothing, right? You didn't think it through. What a stupid mistake was this? What's going on? How irresponsible are you? And then we may say, okay, not be judgmental. Okay, perhaps there are reasons for it. We can also judge someone favorably. But often that's secondary. That comes after we already had the initial judgment in our minds. We see the failure, we put them in a certain box, and then we tell ourselves, don't be judgmental. So the order is switched. For ourselves, the initial feeling is the excuses, all the reasons why it's okay. And then I tell ourselves, you know what? I really shouldn't do it, right? We still, not necessarily are we in denial of our shortcomings, but it's all a perspective. For the other, it usually happens the opposite. First, we see the problem, and then we tell ourselves, don't judge them. We have to convince ourselves, there must be a reason. So Tzemach Tzedek says, true Ahavas Yisrael is that in the same way we don't judge ourselves, that's the way we shouldn't judge others. Naturally, the first thing that comes to mind is put myself in that person's shoes. How would I see myself if I did the exact same thing? And in fact, could be I do the exact same thing. And all the reasons that come to my mind to explain, to rationalize what I do, you should do that for others as well. That's what it means. Like yourself. Are you equal? You're never going to be equal because you have this, right? You're not me. But we should work on ourselves to be extremely non-judgmental. The same way we are non-judgmental on ourselves, that's how we should naturally view others as well. That's what it means. Love your fellow as yourself. And that's why Hillel said in the negative, what you don't want done to yourself, what's the first thing you don't want done to yourself? You don't want people to judge you. People don't want to be judged. People want to be understood. People want others to see them favorably. You don't want people to judge you, don't judge others. That's the Torah. The rest is commentary. The Talmud says a very interesting story. And the story does not have a name, doesn't say who this person is. But this is the story. The story is of a man, an employee, who worked for his employer. His employer was living a very, very lavish lifestyle. Big mansion, big properties, many workers and employees working in his estate. And this particular employee was living away from his home for 3 years to make a living. And after 3 years of working away from his family to make a living, he was getting ready to leave. It was Erev Yom Kippur. And he comes to his employer and says, I'm going back to my family for the holidays. Please pay me for the last 3 years I would like to bring some money home to my family after being away for 3 years. To his surprise, his employer says, I'm sorry, I don't have any. You came in a terrible time. I don't have anything to give you. And the employee is very surprised. I mean, look, just looking around, I see your lifestyle over here. Don't convince me that you don't have any money. He says, you're sure? Like you have nothing to give me? So I'm really sorry. I don't have anything. Well, he had no other choice. He left empty-handed. And he came home. His wife and children were waiting. Oh, finally, daddy's home. He's going to come with some long-awaited money or support the family after 3 years of being away. And he comes empty-handed. And you can imagine what type of holiday they had. Well, after the holiday, who shows up at the employee's door? His employer. And he's there with wagon loads of merchandise. And he says, here, I have your payment for the last 3 years. Here, this is yours. This is all yours. But he says, tell me. The employer asks the employee, when I told you that I have no money to pay you, what were you thinking? So he says, tell you the truth. What I was thinking is that perhaps you're living in this big mansion and all, but maybe you donated everything to the temple. If there's a law that if you say that all that, if I say this mug, I'm donating it to the temple, right? Then even though I have it right now, it's not mine, right? It's called hektish. So perhaps you donated all of your possession to the temple. And therefore, even though you were living in it, but it wasn't truly yours. So you didn't really have anything to give me. And he says, you know what? You're exactly right. That is exactly what happened. So that's why I truly did not have anything to give you. But now I was able to get things. Now I'm paying you. But he says, I wish that we all were non-judgmental as you were non-judgmental. Right? After 3 years of work, and I don't have anything, you could have came and said, what am I sugar? He's living such a lavish lifestyle. He's so cheap. He's just so, right? Not willing to pay me. What type of terrible person this is. But no, you were right away. The first thing that came to mind is trying to think of a scenario where I truly don't have what to pay you. And you were right. That's what the Talmud tells us to teach us the idea of don't judge others. You know who this employee was? None other than Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was this person, this employee, who didn't judge his employer. And I heard that perhaps one of the reasons why the Talmud specifically does not mention his name, but the Talmud is trying to teach us that you don't have to be a Rabbi Akiva to have this type of non-judgmental approach to things. Anyone can do this. You have to work on ourselves a little bit. The mitzvah of ahavta l'reacha kamoicha is something that we each should try to incorporate in our lives. Don't judge others, but not only don't judge others like generally you shouldn't judge others. Don't judge others the same way you don't judge yourself. First thing that should come to mind is, if I was that person, how would I see myself? I would see myself as a good person who maybe had a little failure. Don't judge the person based on what they have done the same way you don't judge yourself. Just to conclude with another story, there was a young man, an educator in Israel, who was he used to go to school, and on the way to school he would do a little carpool to make some extra cash. He would pick up some of the neighborhood children, bring them to school. This was in Israel. It was in the summer. Unfortunately, one day when he dropped off all the kids, he left a toddler in the car. It's a very hot day. Unfortunately, after many hours, the toddler being in the car, the toddler did not survive. He died. And of course, arrested and all this. His name was Nachman Stitzer. And Nachman Stitzer, a wonderful person who made a terrible mistake. He was maybe irresponsible. He didn't look at the car, make sure everyone was out of the car. And this child did not survive. You can imagine he was beside himself. And the family was sitting at Shiva. He definitely did not want to go to that Shiva. He couldn't face the parents of this child. But during Shiva, Nachman Stitzer gets a call from the grandfather of this baby. His name was Yisrael Leichter. Yisrael Leichter calls Nachman. He says, Nachman, I want you to come to the Shiva. I can't come. I want you to come to the Shiva. So he came, he didn't want to look at the family. It was very, very difficult. During the trial, Yisrael Leichter, the grandfather, came to the courthouse. And he says he wants to speak. And he said, listen, Nachman made a terrible mistake. The death of our grandchild is painful every single day. We have pictures of him all over our homes. It's just very difficult. But at the same time, he says, Nachman Stitzer is a good person who made a terrible mistake. What can we do to help Nachman? The judge ended up giving him a much lighter sentence. He had to do a lot of community work. He didn't sit behind bars. Together, Nachman and Yisrael started an organization to help promote the idea behind parents being extra careful, not leaving the children in their cars in the summer, especially in the summer. And perhaps they have saved perhaps many, many children from this terrible, terrible type of incident. But the point is, what the grandfather Yisrael Leichter saw, he says, this can happen to anyone. He's not a bad person. He was a little irresponsible. You can only imagine that now he'll be 10 times more responsible for exactly what he did. Put myself in their shoes. Could have happened to me. Could have happened to any person, right? Be non-judgmental. That's what it means. If it happened to you, how would you see yourself? That's the way you should see when it happens. View it when it happens to someone else. That's my little thoughts for this week's Parsha. Thank you, Lynn, for your comment. We missed you as well. We had a wonderful Pesach in Toronto. Thank God we're back now. Happy to be back. And I look forward to seeing you at our future classes. Just a quick reminder, this Thursday we begin the Tanya class part 2 at 9 o'clock, chapter 18 of Tanya from 9 to 9:30. And as well, our JLI class, Decisions of Fate, which also gives CME credits and CLE credits for lawyers and doctors, begins next Tuesday, May 14th. Please sign up online. We'd love to see you there and have a Shavua Tov. All the best.